Welcome to Noisy Neighbors. My name is Kit Russell, and this is the podcast about artists and creative entrepreneurs who are currently on a journey to build platforms, brands, and businesses in order to become the next generation of influential leaders. On this episode, I had the privilege to sit down and chop it up with Barry Johnson. Barry can be labeled as a mixed media or interdisciplinary creative, but I actually admire him for being so much more. To me, Barry should be the poster child for how to take action in becoming whoever you decide to be in life. In this episode, we discuss how he became a self-taught artist using YouTube, how he transitioned from being a business consultant to a full-time artist, landing gigs all around the world and actually collaborating with big brands, his mindset that he had to acquire and be persistent with in order to become a better vision for himself, and why he chooses to call himself a creative rather than an artist. I was personally inspired by this conversation on so many levels, so I hope you all feel the same. And don't forget to subscribe to Noisy Neighbors wherever you get your podcasts. If you do find this show very helpful or inspiring in any type of way, don't forget to spread the word and share it with at least one friend. Thank you.
Yo, it's been a couple months trying to secure this, so I'm glad we're finally here to actually sit down and have this conversation. And thank you for being persistent on that too. You know, it's easy to kind of forget these things, but I think it's an important conversation, especially I started to dig and do my little bit of background research on you. So just to get things started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your personal story, how you arrived here now, and actually maybe even mention the space that we're in right now, like why are we here?
Yeah. So the super dope thing about it is like we're at base at Equinox. It's like this massive performance space that usually choreographers, performers, and artists of that guild are in. And as an interdisciplinary artist, I'm here showing work throughout the week and putting other artists in the community and giving them a platform to show work. I have a background is business marketing. I never went to school for art. I have no formal training in art, but doing a lot of work and drawing a lot just to kind of keep my mind in flow because I was just working with numbers. And naturally, just drawing so much, I was like, I think I'm onto something here. It brought me so much joy, and it was one of those things, it was a release. And it was one of the things that's like, I don't have to, at the end of work, go grab a drink or go smoke or nothing. It's like, I'm just getting straight to drawing and painting. And the natural graduation of that just had me thinking that I could take everything that historically and in this place, and then I can apply that to art. And without a doubt, I'm sure I could do something really big in it. So I left consulting, started doing art full time. We're about 3 years in, and I've been able to have shows all around the world, art collected around the world, collaborated with massive brands, institutions, teaching, putting other artists on, writing, and art of all kinds, performance, paint, everything. So at the end of the day, it's just, I just like to say I'm just a big kid having fun and just doing everything I can to get those dreams out.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, that you made that transition from being kind of the typical 9-to-5 of working as a consultant, the job that you should have, you're expected to have, and kind of switching that over. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be an interdisciplinary artist. I started looking into your background after you reached out to us on Instagram. This guy paints, he does film, he does sculptures, mixed media, murals, all the works. So what does it mean to be an interdisciplinary artist, and why did you choose that route, if you did?
Straight up, I didn't even know what that was. I just had too many times where people were trying to define my work. It's it's the paint. I was a multidisciplinary artist, and then I saw somewhere referred to interdisciplinary. And I think the super dope thing about it is I don't really even feel that I've earned the right to call myself an artist. Realistically, I just use the moniker creative, right? Because that allows me to go to a brand or anyone and say hey, not only can I provide work for you, but I'm a production warehouse as well. I can tell you about the copy that should be used. I can tell you about the color schemes. I can tell you about the people that you should be working with, the entire layout. So using the moniker creative is a little bit better than actually using an artist because, there's a historical stigma attached to that. And for people that consider themselves artists, they could have certain type of feelings about like other people saying that they're artists. They may be like, yo, like you're not that because you haven't done whatever. So like I like to go by that moniker. So yeah, it's really creative at the end of the day.
Yeah, because and especially kind of what you're doing here tonight too is like being a creative is almost like project management or going back to being a consultant. You're pulling all the different pieces together and actually putting it as a puzzle and seeing it come together rather than just like, hey, I sat here by myself, I had this idea, and that counts too. But then how do you put it to the world? How do you get it out there? That takes the creative.
Exactly. And like the whole idea around it is like this whole we not me mentality, right? Like,
For sure.
I became a creative so that like I can take opportunities that I'm involved in and take everybody that I believe in. Is it okay if I curse? Like everybody I fuck with and like pull them right along with me. So, you know, there's artists that like I know well that I've collaborated with, and there's also people I was like, yo, like they just got super dope work and was like, hey, what do you think about this? And just constantly pitching for other people so that like, you know, something really beautiful. I was thinking about like Saul Williams and how he's always been like, you know, this whole idea of like being able to challenge the machine and like, you know, thinking about like ways that we can get inside to be able to create change. And people were like all tripping out whenever I think like he had an ad that he worked with Nike. And he was like, yo, like you got to be able to create change from the inside. So rather than just being like, you know, everything that's happening wrong in Seattle and like everybody's saying that like, you know, it's losing its touch and like there's all these problems, which are very real problems. It's like, I want to be alongside those institutions working with them, not like as like a group, but with myself and like bringing other people along. So it's like really doing it for the community at large and for us.
That's super huge, especially for the fact that people may not even recognize that there's the separation. There's these two siloed conversations or mini bubbles of people just having like, that's an issue, this is an issue. But when you start to have those conversations together, you start to understand the other side. Then you can realize that, okay, this is where you're coming from, this is where we're coming from. Let's have a conversation.
Right.
And I think art and creatives can actually foster that.
Yeah.
And that's the power in it.
Without a doubt. Every company, realistically, they make these huge mistakes, be it that they're mistakes or they're done intentionally to get a rise out of people. We were just talking about Joe Budden, like I'm sure you know about the outrage marketing. Like, you know what I mean? Like whether they're doing it intentionally because it's like a troll, which is just the new marketing. It's like, but which is disgusting and it should never be that. But if they just had somebody in the room that was like a part of the culture, however you define that, it could have been very easy to be like, yo, like we should have like Kylie Jenner like try to end violence with a Pepsi, and somebody could be like, no, fuck that. That's a horrible idea. Like don't, or like, you know, they're like, yo, we're gonna take, Prada's gonna take this like imagery and say like, oh, it's like this black imagery with like red lips and we're gonna put that on jackets. Somebody could be like, no, that's horrible. Like don't do that. But like all these institutions have this very old school, archaic knowledge, and they're not employing the right people to be in there to have a seat at the tables to be like, yo, like that's not a good idea. And so long that like we are not trying to get in these places and be able to consult, not like you don't have to be the part of the inner fabric of it all, but just like be someone that's like, yo, like just be aware of these things.
Be a voice that's heard.
Exactly. Like, like we'll continue to have problems.
Yeah, and especially because people say, hey, we brought the diversity in, and but you got to get those diversity of opinions, and you have to actually let them be valid at the table. You know, just because they're there and they give their 2 cents and the whole thing doesn't get implemented. Right. And that, you know, that goes back to more of a deeper, more internal problem with these companies. But All right, so when you first reached out to me, you said that you never took an art class yourself, and you just mentioned that too. So I'm curious, how did you go about teaching yourself?
That's the new wave, man. Like, you know, just use the tools of today. I use the internet. Like, there's a lot of creatives that were like, yo, like, I have these skills that I can just put on the web and, like, hopefully that'll reach somebody. So I read this book by Mason Curry called Daily Rituals. And it was really a book that came to fruition out of, like, professional procrastination. And he wanted to start to find out all these creatives throughout history and like what their daily routine was to keep them, as we say, in a vibe, right? Like how do they continue to establish that vibe? So we found out that like all these different creatives like went on and from Benjamin Franklin to, you know, Hemingway and all of these creatives, he like went back and found out what they did every single day. And he wrote it in a book. And what I found reading that book is that 80% of people started their mornings like super early. So I started getting up at 4 a.m. And, having a wife and a kid, like, that's when everybody was asleep. And I would just sit at the table and just watch YouTube and was just like watching videos on drawing and would just do it every day. And then living in Federal Way, I took the bus to Seattle, which ended up being like an hour and a half. I got time on the bus and, like I didn't have a steady hand because of course, like I don't have a drive to table or anything, but I got my muscles very familiar with it. And then that just went on to paint and more and more and more. And realistically, it's like anything that you want, just like apply that relentless grind to it. And there's not a day that goes by where I'm not keeping my muscles active in terms of art. Even the brain more than anything, vibing like this. I don't even know about this whole idea of inspiration. I just like keep everybody around me and just continue to keep myself immersed in what people are doing. And then I just use that as a mechanism to build from.
So kind of what you're describing, I think is a really important. And what I take from that is making it a lifestyle.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. I'm learning. I got to immerse myself in it. Yeah. And I don't think it's easy with so much out here to get distracted to not actually immerse yourself in something. And that sounds like that's what you were doing. It's like, cool, I got this free time. This is what I'm going to work on. It goes back to what you were saying, too, about it fueling you and it giving you kind of the excitement to do something that makes you feel relaxed at the end of the day. Exactly. So you were driven by it.
Exactly. Without a doubt. I was just telling the other performers that are coming in just to come on in when they get here. So sorry about that. Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's the only way. Because, think about every great athlete. Like growing up, like I was never a person that would like fanboy out when it comes to like sport. And I'm not saying that like, like I'm trying to be dope about it. It was just, I always in my life thought that if I applied the same type of relentless work ethic that like all these people that were on TV, the MJs, like, of the world, like both of them, I thought that I would just be able to become something similar to them. And of course, like they're like way, way, way out of here. But my own right, it's like I feel like through all that work that I've just been able to incrementally get better. And again, like along that way, it was like I don't ever want to just like get somewhere and then just see like, look what I did, and like y'all should be able to do it too. Like no, like along that way, I was grabbing the homies. Anybody that I felt like was doing something good, like I brought right along with me and always like stayed mentoring, working with schools and stuff, telling kids like, yo, like there's really like no A to Z way to do this. Like realistically, it's like you just got to decide, commit, and then execute.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So let's talk about your art. Yeah. What are some of the themes and meanings in your work?
So, when it comes to my work, I am always trying to reflect our experience around the world. Like whenever they come up with these like ideas of an artist statement, which I don't rock with, I just say that like my work is in reflection of events that are happening in my life and around the world. So as we spoke about earlier, I'm not a dude that's going to be on Facebook like everything that's happening is wrong right now. No knock against people that do that. I just like use my art as a vehicle to do that. So it's a cultural response to events that are happening around the world. Primarily, you'll see Black people and people of color that are in my work because I feel like throughout art history, we've had a horrible, piss poor fucking representation of us. Like every single time, it's either the struggle art or the art of yesterday where it's like we're in kitchens and like the slave, it's like, no, like I'm trying to demonstrate like our influence on the world and how history has like treated us. So one example is like this very like large series I ended up doing of 20 plus pieces that like all had these Black figures, primarily men, again, because like I'm not trying to sexualize women because that's been done in art so much. I took Black men and I would have their faces like covered up by something or distorted. It would be like tile on a face or a fan or red tape. And really that's a representation of us having our history covered up or distorted to fit another person's narrative. Living in like, around the city and traveling back and forth and just watching the changing tides of the city. I did this large photo series that had everybody naked, shot black and white. And all those people that were in that shot all met that day. And they all had to get naked around each other and be in this massive studio and let us photograph them. So it's like about getting people outside of these very tense moments and like getting them close. I follow this whole idea of like the 3 C's, and everything that I work, I wanted to invoke on community, connection, and culture. Every single thing is that. It's community, connection, and culture. So that is at the root of every project that I'm making. And we do this large installation series with people where I get people that just stand still, and there's usually some performative element that happens around them, but I just want them to stand still and just look at the audience, because we don't, in this age, sit across from each other like we are right now for long periods of time. It like starts to make people a little unnerved. So once you got like a whole group of people, yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. Once you got a whole group of people looking at you, it like creates that tension, and then like there's a performative element there too. And then all those pieces, I always like invite everyone to come in. You know, like here on Thursday, I debuted like the hardest work that I've done yet. It was full of people fighting due to politics, historical racist imagery, blackface used in like minstrel shows as well as like cartoons, the brands that played a part in it, old people getting beat by police. And I had a group of primarily people of European descent that stood up at the forefront of this piece, and like I brought them in and was like, hey, here's the image that I'm going to show. It's a 17 long minute video, which you should watch once we're done here. And at the end of it, like I gave them the opportunity, you know, because we're always looking for allies, right? Like, where are our real allies at? And said, if you don't want to be a part of this, because it wasn't even just about black people, it was about culture entirely. If you don't want to be a part of this, it's completely fine. Like, it's hard to watch. Like, people cried. I actually had people that got up and walked out during the performance because it was so hard for them to watch, because as you can see, like, this is like movie theater size screen, and you're seeing people get beat in front of that, which is hard. And they all stayed, and they were a part of it. And, you know, people cried, and, you know, like we've had a lot of healing that have happened here. But I feel like the work in the median that it's in has to change. I can't be able to tell you what's happening socioeconomically through a painting at times. So I gotta be able to use performance to be able to do that. So it changes a lot.
Yeah, I think with performance, installations, and things like that, it confronts people in a very forward way and forces them to face something that they may have been trying to hide or ignore or weren't even aware of in the first place.
Dead on.
And so I think that's really powerful to do that. And I think it takes a lot of, like you said, that creative mindset to put it all together, but also that bravery to say, screw it, I'm gonna do this.
And like, you know, if we're keeping it a buck, I mean, this whole idea of creative, it's like, I want to be able to go to a brand with a portfolio and be like, okay, we don't want to work with this particular style of paintings, cool. Like, have we thought about a photo series? Cool. And like, even within the painting series, there's at least like 7 different styles that I'm working in, you know? And just depending on like what people I'm working with, you've got to be able to reach people in different ways, you know? And like, I feel like that's something that kind of confines certain artists, because it's like, and which is cool because that's what they want to be able to do. No knock against them, but like, when in terms of just wanting to have like a global reach, I try to keep the work in different mediums, so like it can appeal to people in different ways.
Got you. So that was your intention, and then you end up becoming this quote unquote.
Exactly. Like,
It's really the way to get the message across in different forms.
That's it.
And I think that's really important, because you might have like your intention. That's why you got to step back, and you can't just be like, oh, I'm just a painter. You know, maybe there are other ways you can get something across with the way that you're trying to do it. You know, if you have that kind of like intentional message behind it. And
oh yeah, 100% that's my message. Like, I mean, think about it. Like, I don't know, like, I think art history it's hard for people to be able to view art. You know what I mean? Like, some art is like, let's just think about like certain forms of like the early versions, like pop art and stuff, or the early versions of abstract art. It's like, you got all these colors, or you're just looking at a massive red dot, and you're led to believe that you should be contemplating like the woes of the world by looking at this painting. Some people do, especially like the new age, like everybody's receiving information via their phone and like via these different images. So it's good to be able to use, you know, the technology and the methods at stake to be able to reach the audience and be able to bring them the views into the past, into the present.
So you kind of mentioned about having residencies or getting commissioned work. Let's go into kind of like the business of you being an artist.
Absolutely.
And so how do you land one of those gigs? You know, walk us through your process for how you go about doing
absolutely.
that.
So I think just being a production house, like naturally you're going to end up spending 40% of the time creating, 60% of the time working, right? Trying to get it out there. So it's being able to like make sure the art is on the right platforms, make sure like I'm connecting with the right people, and a lot of pitches. Like anybody that's willing to step into this business and really wants to be able to make a living off it has to have very, very, very thick skin. Because on average, I mean, I'll keep it 100%. Like on average, I'm catching like 10 to 15 no's bi-weekly. You know what I mean? And it's like, and some of these things, like I had to take like 2 weeks, a month to apply for. Some of them, I got to go to other people I work with and said like, hey, can you give me a letter of reference? Which is a hard thing to do because it's like, oh, remember that one letter of reference you gave me? Can you give me another one and another one? You know, so it's like some of it's a nonstop grind, but that's what I signed up for, and I'm built for that, and like I work with people that are built for that. So, you know, it's just worked out now that, you know, the nature of the work is better, so I will have more opportunities where people say yes. Got to do residencies in a lot of different places. I got to hold a residency where I got to make art in a shipping container, and naturally people were like, oh, like maybe I'm going to put like one piece in there. I took that shipping container, my man, and turned that into a party. I had my homegirl, Angel, come through and dance in it. I put projections in there. I had and she's like of the AU collective, which the Gold Collective, and which was such a beautiful thing to do. And she freaked it. And my other homegirl, Lauren McShane, that is with the Seattle Rock Orchestra, I had her playing a cello in a shipping container. Like you think about like Huckleberry Finn, old school style of like, you know, people traveling on these railroad cars to someone playing a cello in a shipping container and like filled it up with art, and everybody was like, that's super dope. So there's that, and like I'm going to Argentina in September, and I'm gonna go out there and make a mural, but it's just like a relentless grind for it. And like in the middle of this week, I was working with the Museum of Pop Culture, curating an event there for Prince, and just like making sure everything's set up there, putting art there, working with artists there, while like running back over here to be able to do this. And then after this, I just got reached to go put art in Portland. Early in the year, I had art in New York. And this isn't even like me like trying to like flash or anything. Like this came after, I'm talking about years of no. And like the funny thing about it is like, for the most part, I was laughed at by people. Like people were just like, yeah, like, I mean, good luck with that, you know, because I walked away from like a job that, like you said earlier, that people want. So they're like, you want to leave this like comfort and safety to be able to like make paintings that you're not even good at making paintings? Good luck with that. That's a pat on the back. Like, good luck with that. And it's like, nah, like I'll show y'all. And I just worked very hard at it and keep pitching. And wherever I see opportunities, like I pitch those. Like I was walking in and I saw this massive building covered with moss in it. And I was like, why can't I just go to that building and then say like, we can do something with the moss out here? Like, why can't I just say that? And like, again, like people more often than not don't know what they want, right? Like that's why it's so easy to lead and control people, because people really don't know what they want. And like, exactly. And like you creating this platform for creatives and makes me think about like, you know, the words of Hove, you know, you want to be the flow, don't go with the flow. You know what I mean? So it's like, at all times, it's like I'm trying to be ahead. Not like I want to be first, but I'm trying to think 2 steps ahead. And that's hard as a black man in this world trying to think ahead. Like Childish Gambino said something that was, well, Donald Glover said something that was so beautiful. They asked him like, well, what do you think more black people need in this world? And he said, just room to fail, because as a black man, you can't fail. Like when you fail once, like at that point, like you're the laughing stock. So it's like, we need those opportunities to experiment and to be able to try and go through the natural process of trial and error. So I'm just trying to see it and like get there. And if it doesn't work out how I planned it to, that's okay, because that laid a foundation for someone else to come in and do something else.
Yeah. And then we have to give ourselves permission to fail first. So no one's going to give you permission to fail unless you fail on your own, or you create an environment for yourself to fail and learn and to grow in those ways. You mentioned creating a pitch. And so this is 2 parts of a question. What's your pitch for your services, and what your, you know, especially when you are getting international gigs, because I'm sure that takes a hustle to even build up the network to reach out to those people, but also pricing yourself. I guess every entrepreneur and every artist probably deals with that too. It's like, how much do I charge for what I do, and how do I determine the value for what I do? Do you have any advice for that?
Let's start at the beginning. So those pitches are going to be specific to each individual place. So I always have like an idea of like how I'm gonna present myself, and that's like, I always make sure to say that like I'm a creative that's worked across like all mediums. I have to at this point say at certain points that like I illustrated and published a book, and that like I'm a TEDx speaker, just so I can like get, going back to TED for that, like I was speaking as an artist next to doctors, scientists, lawyers, like really big people, and they just got this one dude that's like, hey, here's how I created this idea of making art and like changing personas to be able to make more art. But I like to say those things in there. But then it's like, I always like to embrace like something that I was told in my past life called the art of the possible, right? Like, think about this whole idea of like what could possibly be done. Not the, hey, like, I'm gonna go to Hawaii and make art about water, right? Like, no. Like, I wanna go to Hawaii and make art that's gonna interact with the water. And just as there's so many people coming and going in Hawaii, I want to make art that like as people go and as the tide rises, it goes away too. So it's like certain art, like just like this is a one-time thing for you. And I'm always trying to make things specific to one place. Like I don't shop around an idea for, it didn't work at base, so I'm going to take it to on the boards. It didn't work on the boards, I'm going to take it to Spectrum. It's like, no, I want to bring this one project, this one specific thing here. Like in terms of like public art, really like the whole idea of it, because you're thinking about the texture of the building, like the artwork that you can make on there, the square footage, and like all those different things. So it's like really creating like a pitch for yourself, which like a lot of people don't want to do it, but you really gotta pat yourself on the back and say like, I got this. Like one thing that my dad told me that changed my life forever, like growing up in like very racist places, he told me that you never let another person dictate your self-worth. So it's like when he told me that, at a young age, I was ready to go. Like at that point, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm ready to go. Can't nobody tell me nothing. So, being able to build up enough gumption to say like, okay, I'm capable of doing the project, and just understanding that with a lot of these projects, like people may not have an idea exactly on how you could fully execute it because it hasn't been done, but it can be done. Like the residency with like the shipping container, I was like, I will make a party in that shipping container. Like I will turn it into a pop-up gallery. So think about the ideas of a pop-up experience, a gallery, music, and then trust that I can take those and then make those happen. In terms of like the whole pricing, you gotta get what you're worth. Like never undersell yourself. And also don't be afraid to bark back at like people that like have money, but they're trying to undercut you. Once, a lot of this comes public, I'll be able to share more information about like certain companies that I've gone back and forth with in like very, very, very big places that like, I was like, we need to give these people more money. Or it's like, I want to be able to do this, but you need to understand that like creatives, we need to get paid for this. Like some people are just have that whole idea of it's like, do this for me. It's going to get you the notoriety. It's going to give you a springboard, and then you can be out of here. That's good, but also it's like, I need to be able to pay for materials. I need to be able to pay myself. I have a family I had to take care of. Like Seattle's extremely expensive, and like we live, 30 minutes south in Federal Way, like being able to pay for all that stuff. So it's huge. And there's this thing like in art called provenance, where it's like who's owned a painting, and a lot of art gets really, it's all made up numbers really. But it's like a lot of art gets priced on like who owned it. I use an idea of that. It's not like that like anyone massive has owned my art, but just depending on where it showed up at, that affects the price of it. Yeah, so it's like once like I, had the city that collected my art, the price of my art went up. Like once I was able to do a TEDx speak, the price of my art went up. And it's also like knowing your market. Like people are always like, how much is your art? Like there's always a range I'm working with, but whenever I'm putting art in places, I always tell people contact the artist. That needs to be a conversation that could work out between you and them. Some people are like, this is a $15,000 piece, and someone's like, but why? And like, if you're able to have that conversation, and if you know your own self enough to be able to talk through pricing, which you need to be able to do, it's an art in and of itself, just like you said, because people are like, well, like everyone's like, well, how much is this? And it's like, okay, well, This is the material. This is the time that it took me to make. This is the size of it. Now you give me a quote, and then like we can work from there. And just knowing that's just thinking business. Like, you know, let them name their price first, because that gives you an idea of where you can work with. And of course, like if someone's gonna be like, oh, $100, and you know it's like worth $5,000, like, no, come on now, like let you know, don't waste my time. Like let's really get after it. But in a lot of cases, people really don't know how to price art because there is no real mechanism on how to price art. You're really exactly like you're adding a price to your tangible worth in the creation of your works, and you should make sure that does enough for you to get paid. And if someone says no, cool, that's completely fine. Keep making work. Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about, you mentioned this very briefly, but I wanted to go into it a little bit. Oh, What a Wonderful Hair.
Yeah.
The book you illustrated for and published for your daughter.
Yeah.
So why'd you write this book? And I guess kind of the inspiration and meaning behind it.
Yeah. It was a beautiful experience. Like that was really like my first thing I did whenever I left my job. I was like, I'm gonna leave. I have 3 months worth of money that like I can live off of. And then like I'm gonna use that time to fully write and illustrate the book. And it was an amazing experience. The whole backbone around it was like the process of doing hair, which is like Black people know it's just hard, man. It's like, you know, and my daughter like has a hard time getting her hair done. And she didn't even know, because she was so super young and didn't know how to talk about like what type of hairstyle she wanted. So she was 1.5 at the time. So we'd be going through this whole process of like doing her hair, and I would be like, yo, like, what do you want? She'd be like, oh, like I want like the ice cream cones, or like, give me a pony. It's like as she's learning more language. So I was like, we can, rather than like this whole, Love Your Nappy Hair, which is a great book, and all that, I wanted to do like, you know, love the hair that you have, no matter the grade of it, no matter the texture of it, and like, use the kid is like the whole idea of like they're the ones creating the book. So she was the center character of it. Nowhere in that book was like a parent at all. Nowhere. So it's like it could be applied to anyone. It was from the view of her. And, you know, we went through the process of like the pony, like whenever you get braids, we called them snakes, like all these like really beautiful things. And at the time she was like really heavily into animals. So like we had like animals and birds singing. But it was such an awesome thing, man, just to be able to make that with her. And at the time, she didn't even get it. She was just like, oh yeah, like I got this thing. So we're reading the book to her. And now that she's like 5, she's like, yo, like I got my book. And oh yeah, like that's the book that we made. And then we made like a video of the whole process of doing her hair.
I was proud of it too.
Yeah.
What's cool about that is you talk about, you know, and seems like being the change is something that is really important for you personally. And I like that because you're realizing that children can be influenced early on. And if you create something that's a children's book that has a certain message and meaning, you know, with little things that are cool and exciting for them, what impact is that going to have on them? I mean, you can't imagine, but it's definitely probably going to change their perception more so than it might have a young Black girl in the 70s or the 60s growing up in America. And she might come off as a little more confidence, a little bit more like, you know, let me own whoever I am going into the world. So I think that's a beautiful thing, man.
Man, two examples. What did Pac say? He's like, I may not be the change, but I may be the voice that inspires the change. And then look what Kendrick did behind that.
I just said that today in a client meeting today. I was like, this is what you got to do. You know, Pac said, be the, you know, I'm not going to change anyone. I'm not going to change the world, but I'm inspired a person that's going to do that.
And look what he did. Yeah, and think about like another example is Michael Phelps. Like he crossed the world and he came in contact with a kid that told him that he wanted to swim like him, and then he went on to beat him in the Olympics. Like that is a huge deal. Like that same dude that he's working with went on to beat him in the Olympics. And just to real quickly dive in on the importance of like the youth, it is absolute paramount that you work with the youth. Absolute paramount. Like community events I work with, they're always related around like children. And I like to work with like the middle school range, because like kids are always like, everything is so much fun, and they're just like, if they're into it or they're not into it. Kids that are older, like, you know, teenagers, they're finding themselves naturally. Once you're in college, it's like you're out in the world, you kind of have this whole idea of like, I got it. But like that perfect age is like those middle school age. And like those are ones I'm like, no, seriously, like you don't have to go to school for a bit. You don't have to go grow up and work at a bank. Like, you don't, it's great to say that you want to be a doctor or lawyer, or you want to. All you have to do is just tell yourself that you can do it and apply that relentless work ethic to get there, no matter your circumstances. Because my upbringing was much like many people that are around that were able to work through it and be able to ride, be able to have everything that they got. It's like, yeah.
So you also reached out to discuss branding.
Yeah.
And so what does branding, building a brand, mean to you? What's your brand, and how did you go about building it?
Absolutely. Yeah, so from the mud, but it's funny, like everyone, like we're in the era of selfish promotion, right? Like everyone is a vehicle to brand. Like I can, like, and that's just the generation. They believe that they can do it all, which realistically, like they have so many tools that they really can do it. Like, I remember reading this article about saying that like we're in the Einstein age where everyone's able to just kind of do so many different things. And, are they superbly great at it? Not for question, but like once they get in communities and work together, things awesome happen. I really am of the idea that like, you really got to have your own personal touch. You really got to have your own signature. And the funny thing about that is as an artist, I don't have an actual style, which would be a signature. But me and myself is the signature. Here's everything about my life. Like you look at my social media, you do not see our lives present in there. Like you don't see me like, yo, it's 4:00 in the morning. I'm in the studio getting after it. Like, yo, like I'm about to leave the studio, then I'm gonna go for a run, then I'm gonna come back. Like, yo, I'm sitting here chopping it up with Chris. Like, I don't do that. You know what I mean? It's like everybody gets the work at the same time. So I created this brand around like, you never know what you're going to get. You never know what you're gonna get. It's like one day you may get a painting. The next day you may get a sculpture. The week after that you may get a performance. After that, like I'm inviting all creatives to come together for like a photo shoot that like we did a few weeks back. And then that's gonna go to the world all at once. So, I don't do progress shots because I feel like once you start to let people know what you're up to, then it gives them the ability to like stay in pace and anticipate and slowly be able to push you away. And I think by doing that, like my idea of branding has made it, in terms of like global acceptance, it's been slower, right? Because it's like, I don't post like a million pictures of what I'm doing to let people see me. And then they're like, oh yeah, I like this dude based on his personality. I know that they say like in terms of a lot of marketing, it's a lot built on personality. And I'm devoid of that. Like I just give you the work. And then maybe 2 years from now, I'll give you some personality with the work. But for now, I need people to trust in the fact that I can execute on projects. And now that I've built more credibility in that space, like it's very, very, very important that like people know that at the beginning, middle, and end of the day, you are going to be judged on your work. I know a lot of people, writing for an arts publication and just working with so many different creatives that like in real life, like they are not what they appear to be online. And it's all smoke and mirrors, right? Shout out to Anthony that like did the super dope show. But like it's all smoke and mirrors. You know what I mean? It's like everybody is like trying to figure out a way to, kind of hack the internet to work for them. And it's open for them to do that. I just think that like at the beginning, middle, end of the day, like someone's gonna be like, okay, but is it good though, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like we love what No Limit did, and we love, especially like in hindsight, like what they stood for. But like you think back and it's like how many like really, really, really great albums came out of that era. Like there was one point where P dropped 35 albums in a year. Like how many? Crazy. Right, like how many good ones? Or it's like you just oversaturate the market, which some people do. Like that's what they do on Instagram. It's like you oversaturate the timeline, you flood it full of stuff. And one thing that I do on Instagram now is like I don't even stand next to my work. I used to only stand next to a painting to show people scale. But then whenever I was just like, okay, everyone kind of gets this whole painting style enough to where I just let the work be there. And like, trust me, like I go through days where I could get 100 plus likes, 20 plus comments on something. I'll go through a day where I'll get like 10 to 15 likes, but I'm not one that's like there for the likes and comments. I'm like, yo, like I'm going to continue to give people so much work. Whenever I see like other artists that are like, that kind of like they need to constantly stand next to work, no knock against them. But it's like, I wonder what would happen if you stood next to that work or did a completely different style of work. Because like your audience is like, this is what we like you for. And just like I said earlier, like they should not dictate the type of art you're making, nor should they be able to sit back and say like, I want you to make this preferred style of work and I only like this type from you. Like it's your work, do with it what you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I really wanted to ask you about that, because I've gone through your feed and I noticed that you take a different approach for branding. Yeah. But I'm willing to dig beyond that, beyond the numbers or whatever, to see what you're actually doing on your site and also your email newsletter, which I've signed up for and I've been getting the past couple months. Mm-hmm. And I see it more as like you're using your brand intentionally in that way to fuel your business. Because those numbers not going to lie at the end of the day. Those numbers are going to lie for your family. Exactly. And I think it's interesting, and why we really want to talk with you about that, because I think that's something that's not a very common narrative right now about how to brand yourself. And and even ourselves, we don't always necessarily preach that in that way. But I think that's a good way to look about it, as like how to be intentional with it. Right. And actually that goes to specifically, I wanted to talk about that, the email marketing, like how you. I really I had never seen an artist go about that. When I received your email initially after just signing up for it, I think you had posted something, or like I followed a link that just signed up for it, and then it just provided me with all the details. So talk about a little bit about your approach to using email and the importance of that for you.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there are artists that can say they sell work on Instagram. There are artists that sell work on Instagram, which is like a great place for people to be able to buy work, for people to be able to get discovered and more opportunities. But like, I want to be able to reach people a number of ways. And I don't feel like there's really like a better way to reach people than through their pocket, through their email. Like, you can chop it up back and forth on IG, but like eventually that's going to lead you to taking that discussion offline and being able to do more with it. Like, in terms of email, like, I think that that's just a tried true way. It's like, it's been able to work, So it's like, I encourage all of my artists, all of my creative friends to like get a newsletter list, because we are letting these different companies have all the analytics on us whenever we're posting. Like every single time we post these platforms, it's like, here's something for you to have, for you to be able to use to make you more money for your next series of funding. Whereas like you, as a person that's posting the material, you don't get the benefit of that, which is like crazy to me, because you're providing the content for them. Like that whole generation that like we've been able to allow ourselves, like people get pissed off about, like, oh man, like Facebook and Instagram and Apple's taking all my information. Of course they are, they made it. What are you talking about? Like they made it. Like how could you expect that it was yours? So something that is yours is the newsletter list. So once you have a newsletter list, you get that set up, like you're able to be able to grow that. And just like my homegirl, Erin, is the same way, like grow that newsletter list. And once you got your newsletter list, then you can just get right in people's pocket. And you can be able to tell them like, I'm going to be at this space, this time. I got these works available. I got XYZ, ABC, come get it. Like, that's the way that I prefer to work through it.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and owning that is way more important than
you own 100%
else.
Of it.
Yeah.
You own it all.
Yeah. And if Facebook goes down, Instagram goes down, you still have that email listserv.
You still got, you can back that up. And like, so, we're, as people that work in numbers, like we can talk about like clicks and impressions. You don't know any of that for Instagram. You don't know any of it. You can get this like whole idea of preferred views or like how many impressions, but like the average person doesn't even know what an impression actually is. You know what I mean? So whenever going back to branding and approaching these different companies, like I can go to a place and I can tell them how many people make up my newsletter list. I can say that like, on average, once I send out one email, that equates to X amount of dollars. You know what I mean? Like, so rather than being like on Instagram, like, hey guys, like, I just sold XYZ paintings, this is no longer available. I can have that in my newsletter list to say like, hey, like, this is the next wave that's coming up. If you want to be able to be the first person that gets there, let me know. And I divvy up my newsletters in different ways. Like I have a collectors list, I have an events list, I have like here's a general list. So it gives me different ways to be able to reach people.
So growing a community, either through your email list or just in general, you had mentioned in the first DMs you sent to me that that's important as an artist, and that's something that you wanted to talk about. Right. So what are some of the ways that people do that to grow a community around their art, or just to grow a community in general? what works, what doesn't work.
Get out. You got to be out. Like, you got to be visual, because like there's so many people that are hungry, that are doing the exact same thing, and that are having better success than you because they may have done something a little bit different. Like, I have artists that reach out to me all the time. They're like, yo, like, how was you able to like get the opportunities you got? And I was like, it's a grind. Like, I'm out there, I make myself super visible. And at the end of the day, it's like I get people an email and a phone number for them to be able to reach out to. And I don't care that I have to advocate on myself a lot. Like, this conversation happened because I advocated on behalf of myself. Like, I reached out to you and was like, yo, like, I think I would be a good candidate to talk to. And, and because that ego is at the door, like, none of that even matters. Like, there is no ego involved. And there's times where, like I said earlier, you'll hear that no. So in terms of being able to build that community and do everything, it's one of those things where you got to make yourself visible, and you got to give people, a way to get in contact with you. There's so many times where someone's like, oh yeah, like, well, where can I find more of your work at? And they're like, oh yeah, just look me up online, like, and it's cool, like, Google me, Bing me, whatever. But it's like, no, like, okay, do you have like your phone with you? Okay, cool. I'm gonna send you this link. Go to this link and then sign up here, and I will make sure that you're in contact with me. And being sure to be good about taking people's information and then following up with them. There's so many times where someone's like, I used to go to marketing events. We all have marketing backgrounds. You go to a marketing event, it's like a pitch event where everybody's telling you like, hey, Chris, good to meet you here. Maybe we can do business together. And it's like,
who follows up after that?
Who cares? Yeah. And on top of that, it's like, but business on what? Like, where's the actual connection that we can make? Like, I'm trying to make worthwhile connections and build a worthwhile community. So with that, like, I will take those emails, be sure to follow up with people, and like where people said like, I'm gonna reach out to you, remind them about it. Like, yo, like, it's been a minute, we haven't catched up. Like, yo, let's catch up. Yeah. I take like 2 weeks out of the month to make sure that like I'm circling around with people that I need to have meetings with so I can make sure that things happen.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about your TED Talk. Yeah. So I watched that this morning. First off, how do you land those? Like, how do you even get into doing a TED Talk?
Yep. I had to pitch, man. I had to pitch it. Like, that was one of the things that like really was on my bucket list of life. And it's funny because like I told myself whenever I worked in tech, it's like, I'll never be able to do a TED Talk because it's like, again, like I'm working for a company, this super dope company, like, but like I don't really know what I'm doing here that's like amazing. And it's like, this is taking up so much of my time that like I can't even do my own creative endeavors to be able to do something worthwhile enough to be able to do a TED Talk. So after I did a lot as an artist, I was like, yo, like I think I have the ability to pitch them. So I hit them up and was like, hey, I got this crazy idea about like, how you can apply these different personas. Like you can just take on different identities. And realistically, it's just like vibing. Like we said earlier when we were watching that Nipsey video, it's like, yo, like you can't not look at this and want to be able to say like, I got 16, right? Like everybody's got 16 bars ready. You know what I mean? So it's like, I just took that and just like blew it up bigger and said like, take these different personas and like built this whole story around like personas and like how they can be a benefit to you, which to anyone they can. Because realistically, all it's saying is like, I'm just gonna get in my mode, right? It's like you're gonna look to other podcasts to be like, yo, like I wanna keep it lively. I wanna follow this type of methodology. So it's just really just adopting a different persona. It's to them. And, it's funny because initially they said no and they thought on it and they came back and was like, yo, can we talk to you about this? Yeah. And then I knew that I had to shine in that moment. So I'm outside, my kid's inside, and I was like, sweetheart, just give me 10 minutes. Like, that's really what I need. Like, I'm really just trying to knock something out of the park. And, I advocated on myself, like, wholeheartedly. And was like, yo, I got this. I'm fully confident I can do it. And it's funny because, like, out of everyone there that went on to do their talks, like, the coaches were like, you really were dialed in. Like, you really knew what you were doing. Like, you really walked up there and was like, it was very well known that you were prepared. And it was like, yeah, it took 7 months of preparation and hundreds of rewrites, and we got it.
Yeah, for 14 minutes.
14 minutes, yeah. And then I turned around and took that to be able to speak at the Digital Summit. And like that's, again, as an artist, I'm going to speak at the Digital Summit. Like, yo, like I'm going to talk to people about like this whole idea of like how they can reach communities. And then I'm going to take that and then parlay that into pitching for the Seattle Interactive Conference. So like I want to make sure that like I'm operating in different worlds.
So, and I think that just is a testament to your mindset. And that's something also I wanted to kind of touch on is So you've done a lot in your life, right? You've owned all these different personas, been an artist, bodybuilder, entrepreneur, public speaker. So how do you have the mental strength to kind of decide what to pursue?
Right.
Because I think options is a tough thing. Like people are indecisive. And then once you decide, how do you follow through on that?
Yeah, I'm never afraid to fail. Like I've always walked into everything knowing that I'm completely fine falling flat on my face, being the fucking laughing stock of the community, and then just like showing people later. Like I applied the same thing with like bodybuilding. I remember like just being, pounds in high school and got in college. I watched a bodybuilding contest and walked out and said, I'm gonna do bodybuilding. And two of my homeboys that were with me, one of them laughed at me and was like, there's no way in hell that you'll ever do bodybuilding unless you take steroids. And I was like, I'm not gonna take steroids. Like, I'm just gonna work really fucking hard. Yeah, went on, won a whole bunch of competitions and went on, competed, took place in nationals, like did everything I could, and then was like, yo, like just applying that relentless mentality and like knowing that it's just all about discipline, man. Like I don't even drink caffeine. Like I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke weed. Like I used to, but like at this point in life, I understand how like as we want to become incrementally better, how dialed in you actually have to be. My statistics teacher said something that was super dope to me. Said that, for a person to go from a D grade to a C grade isn't really that hard. It's like you got to add about 10 more hours. For a person to go from a C to a B, you got to add a little bit more. Once you start going from a B to an A, that's when it starts to get a lot more. And he's like, you have to think about like from someone that has like a 95% and they want to go to a 97%. That person needs to work more hours than all of those other people combined. Right, and he's like, that is what greatness is. And once he said that, I was like, Jesus, shit blew me away. I was like, yeah, like the work has to, the dedication and the amount of work you need to put in is so much. While also having fun, vibing out, having fun with the homies, but like, yeah, it's just nonstop grind.
So I'm going to wrap this up with a couple more questions. These are kind of more personal. For you, what advice would you give yourself if you were to start all over again? And then if you were to start all over again as that little kid that was looking up to Batman, that wanted to adopt that persona?
Yeah. When you say device, what do you mean device? Like
what advice?
Advice.
Advice.
Yeah, man. What's funny is like, what Puff say? Like, throw me in the jungle, butt naked. 10 months later, I'll come out 20 pounds heavier wearing a chinchilla coat. Like, same advice, like never let another person dictate your self-worth. That's it. Like, because if that is universal language you can tell to anyone that if you really take part in it, nothing holds you back. Because like what is our greatest fears, our greatest, our greatest like worries lie in our inability to be able to do things, right? But what's that old quote about? It's like, our greatest fears lie in like I can't even remember the quote off the top of my head, but it's, it's like thinking of like it should be like how great you really truly are. Yeah. I mean, it's like if you knew, think about this divisionally when it comes to like races. Like in most races, like a lot of people are taught from the go, like people of European descent, like you got this. Like, I read this book, The Tipping Point. They were talking about like kids that were black and kids that were white that were going to a doctor, and like a family that like these kids were both scholastically the exact same, but life they stuttered because like their parents were like, when you're going to the doctor, don't say anything, like stay quiet, like don't ask any questions, like do as you're told. But like these kids of European descent, they're like, what does it mean? Why do men have Adam's apple? Like, why is one more pronounced in a boy than a girl? And they're like, well, ask the doctor that. So long as you get people asking questions and like really believing that like they're capable and that they're worthwhile, they'll be fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
And asking questions is that permission to fail. And that goes back to what we were talking about before. Once you give that permission to fail, you can ask the questions, which gives you opportunity to learn, to grow. And that's just a simple change. Right. And a lot of people are afraid of that. So last thing, just what's next for you, man?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, we're going to let, Kamari, she's going to kill this space tonight. It's going to be super, super, super dope. And then we got artwork that's at Kent Gallery next week. And then I'm going to Portland after that. And then I got a super big announcement that I cannot wait to reveal to the world. but we're so close. That's under NDA, so I can't say anything about it. And then Singapore. But just more dope work, man. And like realistically, at the end of the day, it's just like, just gonna keep fucking shit up. That's it.
Yeah. Where can people follow and support you?
Yeah, BarryJohnson.co. That's where you can find me. That's my website. Sign up for my newsletter. I try to be as like good as I can about posting updates pretty often, but like, connect with me there.
Find this episode insightful, helpful in any way, or inspiring, please invite one other friend. That's all we ask, is just one other friend to listen in and join the Noisy Neighbors community so that we can continue to spread this word and also to build the community around it. Thank you.